October 26th, 1966. A brisk autumn wind whispered through the nascent suburbs of Houston, Texas, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and distant industry. For 19-year-old Christina Rosario, this was a day of quiet anticipation, a final mundane morning before a night that promised the vibrant chaos of a rock and roll concert. Her cherished 1964 Chrysler Imperial, a sleek embodiment of American automotive aspiration, sat gleaming in the driveway, ready to carry her and her best friend, Melissa Jenkins, to a world of electric guitars and youthful abandon. Christina, a young woman on the cusp of adulthood, possessed a spirit as bright as the car's polished chrome, a future stretching out before her like an open highway. She had recently graduated high school, brimming with the optimism of a generation that believed anything was possible. Her parents, immigrant dreamers who had carved a life out of resilience, saw in Christina the embodiment of their hopes, a living testament to the opportunities of their adopted home. Melissa, her inseparable confidant, shared Christina's excitement, their laughter often echoing through the halls of their high school, now replaced by the hushed whispers of anticipation for the evening's adventure. The concert, a local band with a growing reputation, was the highlight of their week, a brief escape into the pulsing heart of youth culture. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the Texas sky in hues of fiery orange and deep violet, the ordinary rhythm of their lives would be violently, irrevocably broken. The girls never arrived at the concert. Their friends, initially unconcerned, assuming a change of plans or a spontaneous detour, grew increasingly uneasy as the hours bled into the early morning. Calls to their homes went unanswered, a growing knot of dread tightening in the stomachs of parents who had once only known worry in its gentler forms. The Chrysler Imperial, a beacon of Christina's independence, vanished with them. It was as if they had driven into a void, swallowed whole by the sprawling, indifferent Texas landscape. The initial missing persons report, filed with a sense of urgency born of mounting fear, sparked what would become one of the most baffling and enduring mysteries in Texas history. A frantic search began, encompassing the roads leading to the concert venue, the girls' usual haunts, and every conceivable place a young couple might go. Police combed through parking lots, questioned acquaintances, and put out an alert for the distinctive Imperial. The sheer emptiness of their disappearance, without a trace, without a witness, was chilling. How could two young women and a relatively large vehicle simply vanish? The silence that followed was deafening, punctuated only by the rising panic of their families. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and the vibrant hues of autumn faded into the stark grays of winter. Yet the mystery of Christina and Melissa remained unsolved, a gaping wound in the heart of a community grappling with the unthinkable. The initial theory, a runaway scenario, quickly unraveled. Christina and Melissa had no history of rebellious behavior, no known grievances, and no indication of wanting to leave their lives behind. Their plans for the future were clear, their ties to family and friends strong. The idea that they had simply decided to disappear seemed utterly incongruous with their characters. As the trail grew colder, the hope of finding them alive began to wane, replaced by a grim determination to uncover the truth, no matter how painful. The search widened, extending beyond Houston's city limits into the vast, often unforgiving, rural stretches of Texas. Every abandoned farmhouse, every overgrown field, every quiet road became a potential site of discovery, each one yielding nothing but disappointment. The Chrysler Imperial with its distinctive features, should have been easy to spot, yet it remained elusive. A ghost car in a landscape that seemed to conspire in its concealment. The anguish of the families was palpable, a constant gnawing presence that overshadowed every waking moment. They clung to fragments of hope, to fleeting rumors, to any whisper that might bring them closer to their daughters. But the whispers turned to echoes, and the echoes faded into silence, leaving behind only the profound ache of absence. What began as a local police investigation escalated into a regional effort, then into a cold case that would haunt generations of law enforcement officers. The question persisted, a relentless drumbeat in the minds of those who remembered. Where were Christina and Melissa, and what had truly happened on that fateful October night? 15 years later, in the spring of 1981, the forgotten whispers of Christina and Melissa resurfaced, triggered by an almost unbelievably bizarre discovery on an abandoned ranch just south of Houston. The ranch, a desolate expanse of scrub brush and rusted outbuildings, had been recently acquired by a developer with plans for a new housing complex. As heavy machinery began to break ground, an excavator operator noticed an anomaly in the soil, a section that felt unnaturally soft, yielding to the weight of his equipment in a way that defied the hard Texas clay. Curious, he dug deeper, and what he unearthed sent a chill down his spine. 13 feet below the surface, encased in a thick cocoon of hardened earth, lay the unmistakable skeletal remains of a car. Not just any car, but a vintage 1964 Chrysler Imperial, its once gleaming chrome dulled by decades of subterranean slumber, its once vibrant paint faded to a patchwork of rust and decay. The discovery was immediately reported to the local authorities, who arrived on the scene with a palpable sense of unease. The sheer effort involved in burying a car of that size to such a depth spoke volumes about the dark intentions behind its concealment. This was no accidental ditching. This was a deliberate, meticulous act of obliteration. The revelation brought a fresh wave of investigators to the desolate ranch, their faces etched with a mixture of grim determination and morbid fascination. The exhumation of the vehicle was a painstaking process, requiring specialized equipment and an almost archaeological precision. As the layers of earth were carefully peeled back, the outlines of the car emerged, a ghostly sentinel from a forgotten past. The forensic team, led by seasoned detectives who had seen their share of grim discoveries, approached the task with a solemn intensity. They knew that within the corroded shell of this vehicle lay the answers to a decades-old enigma, and potentially the tragic fate of 2 young women. The car was carefully hoisted from its grave, its metallic groan a haunting echo of the secrets it held. Once on solid ground, the examination began. The interior, despite the passage of time and the crushing weight of the earth, offered immediate chilling clues. The front seats were still partially intact, though severely degraded, and nestled within the crumbling upholstery, a small silver locket was found, its delicate chain entwined with strands of long, dark hair. This locket, almost miraculously preserved, would prove to be a pivotal piece of evidence. Further investigation of the interior revealed the remains of what appeared to be 2 female bodies, their forms largely decomposed but still identifiable as human. The discovery sent a jolt through the investigators. The missing persons reports of Christina Rosario and Melissa Jenkins, long relegated to cold case files, were immediately pulled. The distinct make and model of the car, the approximate age of the remains, and the geographical proximity to where the girls had vanished, all pointed to an undeniable, horrific conclusion. This was Christina's Chrysler, and these were the remains of the two missing teenagers. The revelation, though long feared, hit the families of Christina and Melissa with the force of a fresh tragedy. For 15 years, they had lived in a purgatory of uncertainty, clinging to the faint hope that their daughters might still be alive, somewhere, somehow. Now, that fragile hope was shattered, replaced by the crushing weight of a definitive, devastating answer. The discovery marked the end of one mystery, but the beginning of another, far darker inquiry. Why were they buried? Who had committed such a heinous act? And what unspeakable events had transpired in that car on that long-ago autumn night? The questions piled up, each one more chilling than the last, transforming a simple missing persons case into a full-blown murder investigation, thrusting the long-forgotten victims back into the spotlight of a somber narrative. The quiet suburban tragedy had become a macabre historical puzzle, waiting to be meticulously pieced together by a new generation of investigators. The truth, they knew, would be buried deep, just like the car, and extracting it would require an unwavering commitment to justice. The forensic examination of the buried Chrysler Imperial began in earnest, a meticulous process undertaken by a team of specialists at a secure facility. The car, once a symbol of youthful freedom, was now a sealed tomb, holding within its rusted confines the tragic narrative of its former occupants. Every inch of the vehicle was subjected to intense scrutiny, from the severely corroded exterior to the surprisingly preserved, albeit degraded interior. What they found within the wreckage painted a harrowing picture. Though time and decomposition had taken their toll, the coroner's report on the skeletal remains confirmed the identities: Christina Rosario and Melissa Jenkins. Both had sustained severe blunt force trauma to the skull, consistent with a violent attack. There were no signs of bullet wounds or knife injuries, suggesting a brutal, close-quarters assault. The presence of struggle was also evident. Fragments of torn clothing and dislodged personal effects were scattered within the car's interior, even after decades underground. The most pivotal discovery inside the vehicle was a rusty, uniquely shaped arrowhead, found lodged deep within the driver's side floorboard, nestled beneath Christina's remains. It was clearly an antique, handmade, and bore distinctive etchings. Its presence was perplexing. It didn't seem to fit the narrative of a modern crime. Was it a weapon, a decorative item, or a clue deliberately left behind, or perhaps accidentally dropped by the perpetrator? The locket, recovered earlier, contained a faded photograph of Christina and Melissa laughing, a poignant reminder of the lives abruptly extinguished. But it was the arrowhead that truly seized the investigators' attention, transforming the case from a simple double homicide into something far more intricate, hinting at an unexpected cultural or historical connection. As the forensic analysis continued, the discovery of a damaged CB radio antenna snapped off and, lying on the back seat, raised further questions. Was this a sign of struggle, or had it been deliberately broken? The presence of a CB radio, relatively common for the era, also suggested a potential means of communication, perhaps with someone outside the car, or even a struggle for control over it. The initial assumption that the girls had been murdered inside the car and then buried with it held strong. The depth of the burial, 13 feet, indicated significant planning and effort, pointing away from a spontaneous act of violence. This was a calculated disposal, designed for ultimate concealment. The condition of the car itself offered further insights. While severely rusted, there were no obvious signs of collision damage, ruling out a car accident as the cause of death. The damage was consistent with forced entry or a struggle within the confined space. The tires were flat, consistent with long-term burial, but the undercarriage showed no signs of impact that would suggest it had been driven off-road before being buried. The focus shifted to how the car was buried. The location of the ranch, relatively remote in 1966, offered a secluded spot for such a gruesome act. The use of heavy machinery, likely a backhoe or excavator, would have been necessary to dig a pit of that size and depth. This suggested a perpetrator with access to such equipment, or someone who could commandeer it. This detail immediately narrowed the field of suspects. Who, in 1966, Houston had access to heavy machinery and a secluded property? The implications were chilling. Was this a crime committed by someone with local knowledge, someone familiar with the ranch and its potential for secrecy? The local sheriff's department, now deeply involved, began to re-interview witnesses from the original missing persons case, hoping that the passage of time might loosen tongues or jog forgotten memories. They revisited the girls' social circles, their families, and anyone who might have seen them on the night of October 26, 1966. The focus intensified on individuals with connections to both Christina and Melissa and the specific area where the car was found. The initial inquiries into the arrowhead revealed it to be consistent with ancient Native American craftsmanship, possibly from a local tribe. Its age was estimated to be hundreds of years old. Its provenance was a baffling detour in a modern murder case. How did an artifact of such antiquity become so intrinsically linked to the gruesome fate of two teenage girls in a 1964 Chrysler? Was it a trophy, a warning, or simply a random object present at the scene? The unsettling juxtaposition of a modern crime with an ancient artifact deepened the mystery, suggesting a narrative far more complex and disturbing than anyone had initially imagined. The silence of 15 years had been shattered, but the revelations brought not clarity, but a new, more profound layer of questions, pushing investigators down a path they never could have anticipated. The case of Christina and Melissa was no longer just about two missing girls. It was about the secrets buried deep, both in the earth and in the fabric of a community. The antique arrowhead, meticulously removed from the car's interior, became the reluctant star of the investigation. Its very presence defied explanation, a historical artifact intertwined with a modern tragedy. Expert analysis quickly confirmed its authenticity, a genuine hand-chipped projectile point, dating back centuries, likely a relic of one of the indigenous tribes that once roamed the Texas plains. But how did it come to rest beneath Christina's remains in a 1964 Chrysler Imperial? The question haunted the investigators, pulling them into a rabbit hole of historical research and speculative theories. Its unusual nature made it an unlikely murder weapon, yet its placement suggested it was no mere happenstance. Was it a family heirloom, a curio collected by one of the girls, or something far more sinister, a macabre calling card left by a killer with an unsettling connection to the past? The focus shifted dramatically from a simple homicide to a crime with potentially profound, unsettling cultural implications. The local law enforcement, now working in conjunction with state and federal agencies, began to delve into the history of the abandoned ranch. Old property deeds, historical records, and local folklore were meticulously examined. The ranch, it turned out, had a checkered past, marked by several ownership changes and a reputation for being somewhat isolated and at times unsavory. In the 1960s, it had been briefly owned by a reclusive individual, a man named Silas Blackwood, who was known for his eccentric behavior and a fascination with local history and Native American artifacts. Blackwood had purchased the ranch in the early 1960s, ostensibly to pursue his archaeological interests, though he was not a formally trained archaeologist. He was known to spend countless hours digging on his property, often boasting of uncovering ancient relics. He had lived alone, rarely interacting with the local community, and had a reputation for being fiercely territorial. When the investigators began to look into Blackwood, they discovered a disturbing detail. He had mysteriously vanished in 1968, just 2 years after Christina and Melissa disappeared. His property had fallen into disrepair, eventually being repossessed and left abandoned until the recent development plans. The timing of his disappearance, coupled with his known interest in artifacts and his secluded property, immediately placed him at the top of a rapidly forming suspect list. A warrant was issued, and the search for Silas Blackwood intensified. Though the passage of over a decade made the task immensely challenging. Had he fled? Had he met a similar fate to the girls? The possibility that Blackwood himself might have been a victim, or that he was the perpetrator who then vanished to escape justice, added another layer of complexity to an already convoluted case. While the search for Blackwood commenced, forensic anthropologists re-examined the skeletal remains of Christina and Melissa. The advanced techniques available in the 1980s, far more sophisticated than those in 1966, offered new insights. Microfractures on the girls' bones suggested a struggle consistent with being confined in a small space, likely the car. Trace evidence analysis, though challenging due to decomposition and burial, revealed minute fibers that did not match the girls' clothing. These fibers, barely visible to the naked eye, suggested the presence of another individual or individuals in the vehicle during the attack. The presence of these foreign fibers, coupled with the blunt force trauma, solidified the theory of a violent double homicide within the car. The CB radio antenna, found broken, was analyzed further. Experts determined that it had been snapped with considerable force, consistent with a struggle for control over the radio, or perhaps a desperate attempt to use it. This reinforced the image of a frantic fight for survival within the confined space of the Chrysler. What if the girls had been trying to call for help? What if their killer had silenced their cries by destroying their only link to the outside world? The implications were grim, painting a picture of terror and desperation in their final moments. The search for Silas Blackwood extended across state lines, leading investigators down dead ends and false leads. His family, when eventually located, reported that they had lost contact with him years ago and knew nothing of his whereabouts. They described him as an intelligent but intensely private man, prone to eccentricities, but not violent. This assessment, however, was now juxtaposed with the horrific evidence found on his former property. The arrowhead remained the enigmatic key, a silent witness to a crime that echoed through centuries. Was it merely an incidental detail or a deliberate twisted signature left by a killer with a fascination for the past? The intersection of ancient history and modern murder created a narrative that was both horrifying and compelling, deepening the collective unease surrounding the fate of Christina Rosario and Melissa Jenkins. The quiet horror of the discovery on the ranch had opened a Pandora's box, revealing not only the grim fate of the girls, but also hinting at a far more unsettling saga waiting to be fully unearthed. As the hunt for Silas Blackwood intensified, so too did the pressure to understand the full scope of the tragedy that had unfolded on his secluded ranch. The investigation moved beyond the immediate forensic findings and into the murky waters of human psychology and the chilling capability for calculated violence. Local folklore and fragmented accounts of Silas Blackwood painted a picture of a man teetering on the edge of social acceptability, while his family described him as non-violent. Whispers from the community suggested a darker side, a temper, an obsessive nature, and a growing paranoia in the years leading up to his disappearance. Some recalled odd interactions, Blackwood speaking in riddles or making cryptic remarks about the spirits of the land that inhabited his property. These anecdotes, once dismissed as harmless eccentricity, now took on a sinister resonance, viewed through the prism of a double murder. The narrative began to coalesce around a terrifying possibility. Blackwood was not just a recluse, but a disturbed individual whose obsessions had curdled into lethal violence. The theory gained traction that Christina and Melissa, perhaps taking a wrong turn or seeking a shortcut, had inadvertently stumbled onto Blackwood's property. Given his territorial nature and his known penchant for isolation, their presence might have been perceived as an intrusion, a violation of his secluded world. The blunt force trauma suggested a sudden, violent outburst, perhaps fueled by a delusion or an extreme reaction to perceived trespass. The discovery of the antique arrowhead continued to be a perplexing detail. Could it have been an item Blackwood was carrying, a part of his collection, perhaps used as an improvised weapon in a moment of frenzied rage? Or was it a more deliberate, symbolic act, a twisted homage to his fascination with ancient history, leaving a mark on his victims? The second scenario was far more disturbing, hinting at a premeditated element to the crime, a killer who saw himself as a participant in some dark, historical narrative. The possibility of an occult or ritualistic motive was briefly considered, given the arrowhead and Blackwood's rumored eccentricities, but quickly dismissed by seasoned detectives who focused on more tangible evidence. While Blackwood had a peculiar interest in ancient lore, there was no indication he engaged in any form of ritualistic practice. The theory of a sudden, brutal attack followed by a meticulous burial became the most compelling narrative. The sheer effort to dig a grave 13 feet deep and conceal a large vehicle pointed to a killer who was not only strong and determined, but also resourceful and adept at operating heavy machinery. This aligned perfectly with Blackwood, who was known to maintain and operate his own excavation equipment for his archaeological endeavors on the ranch. The shattered CB radio antenna inside the car took on new significance. If the girls had been trying to call for help, Blackwood might have reacted violently to silence them, snapping the antenna in a desperate attempt to cut off their communication. This detail underscored the terror of their final moments, trapped in a confined space with a killer intent on silencing them. The psychological profile of a killer who meticulously buries his victims with their car, only to vanish himself, suggested a deep-seated pathology. Such an individual would likely be meticulous, obsessive, and driven by a powerful need for control and concealment. Blackwood, with his reclusive nature and intense focus on his land, fit this profile chillingly well. As the investigation reached its peak, a breakthrough occurred. Silas Blackwood's remains were found in a shallow, unmarked grave on a separate, even more remote section of his former ranch, approximately 5 miles from where the Chrysler Imperial had been discovered. The discovery was made by a team of cadaver dogs, brought in as a last-ditch effort after weeks of fruitless searching. Blackwood had been shot twice in the chest, and his body had been hastily buried, a stark contrast to the elaborate concealment of the car and its victims. The discovery of Blackwood's body did not provide the simple closure the investigators had hoped for. Instead, it opened up a new, unsettling chapter in the saga. It raised the immediate, terrifying question: if Blackwood was dead, and had been for years, who had killed him? And was his death connected to Christina and Melissa's murders? The answers to these questions were not immediately clear, pushing the investigation into an even more labyrinthine series of possibilities. Had Blackwood been killed by an accomplice after he murdered the girls? Had he been murdered by someone else entirely, for reasons unrelated to the double homicide, leaving the mystery of the girls' deaths to fester for decades? Or had he, in a final act of twisted logic, taken his own life after committing the unspeakable crime, his body eventually found years later in a separate act of discovery? The case, once seemingly nearing a resolution, spiraled into a more complex web of interconnected deaths, each revelation only deepening the sense of dread and uncertainty that clung to the desolate Texas ranch. The silence of the plains continued to hold its secrets tightly, even as the truth, slowly, painfully, began to emerge, piece by agonizing piece. With the discovery of Silas Blackwood's remains, the narrative of Christina and Melissa's murder twisted into an even more intricate and tragic tapestry. The initial relief that Blackwood, the likely perpetrator, had been found, quickly dissipated, replaced by a profound sense of foreboding. The manner of his death, shot twice in the chest and hastily buried, was in stark contrast to the elaborate, meticulous concealment of the Chrysler Imperial. This suggested either a desperate act, or more chillingly, the involvement of a third party, a co-conspirator who had eliminated Blackwood after the girls' murders. Investigators meticulously re-examined every aspect of Blackwood's life, seeking any connection, any hint of another individual who might have been involved. His reclusive nature made such a discovery challenging, but they delved into his financial records, his infrequent trips into town, and any known acquaintances, however peripheral. The theory of an accomplice, or even a different killer altogether, gained momentum. What if Blackwood himself was not the primary aggressor, but merely a facilitator, or even another victim of a larger, more sinister plot? This line of inquiry was deeply unsettling, suggesting that the horror on the ranch might have been far more widespread than initially imagined. The forensic analysis of Blackwood's body, though hampered by decomposition, provided critical clues. The bullets recovered from his chest were compared to ballistics records, but no immediate matches were found. The weapon used to kill him remained elusive. The timeline of his death was also crucial. Based on the decomposition, he had likely died sometime in late 1968 or early 1969, approximately 2 years after Christina and Melissa vanished. This time frame was critical. If he died after the girls, it solidified the idea that he had likely been involved in their murders. But who killed him, and why? One theory suggested Blackwood, consumed by guilt or paranoia, had been confronted by an individual connected to the girls' disappearance, perhaps a relative or someone else seeking justice outside the law. This vigilante scenario, though purely speculative, offered a grim sort of symmetry to the violence. Another, more plausible theory, centered on an accomplice. Had Blackwood, after the murders, fallen out with a partner in crime, leading to his own demise? The sudden, violent nature of his death and the comparatively shoddy burial pointed to a crime of passion or desperation, rather than the calculated precision seen in the concealment of the Imperial. The investigators also considered the possibility that Blackwood's interest in Native American artifacts and his digging on the property had inadvertently led him to something or someone dangerous. Could he have unearthed not just relics, but a secret that someone was willing to kill to protect? This avenue though more outlandish, could not be entirely dismissed given the bizarre presence of the arrowhead in the car. As the investigation continued, a witness, an elderly man who had once worked sporadically on Blackwood's ranch, came forward with a crucial piece of information. He recalled seeing another man, younger and more athletic, helping Blackwood with heavy digging around the time Christina and Melissa disappeared. He described the man as a drifter, someone who worked odd jobs and moved frequently. He remembered hearing fragments of heated arguments between the two men, often about money or the things they found on the property. This testimony was a game changer. It introduced a concrete third party into the narrative, providing a potential accomplice to Blackwood and a likely suspect in Blackwood's own murder. The description of the drifter was vague, but the detail about things they found immediately brought the mysterious arrowhead back into sharp focus. Had the girls stumbled upon Blackwood and this drifter in the midst of some illicit activity? Or had the arrowhead been a point of contention between Blackwood and his accomplice, leading to a fatal confrontation? The revelation painted a picture of a far more complex crime than a lone, deranged individual acting in isolation. It suggested a collaboration, a shared secret that ultimately turned deadly for all involved. The search for this unnamed drifter began, extending the investigation even further, encompassing a wider net of transient workers and forgotten identities from the late 1960s. The quiet tragedy of two missing girls had evolved into a multi-layered mystery of murder, betrayal, and concealed secrets, stretching across decades and leaving a trail of death in its wake. The desolate Texas ranch, once a place of silence, now echoed with the grim whispers of a past that refused to stay buried. The truth was agonizingly close, yet still obscured by layers of time, deception, and the unsettling unknown. The emergence of the unnamed drifter as a potential key figure irrevocably altered the course of the investigation, transforming the case from a double murder with a lone, eccentric perpetrator into a complex web of interconnected crimes. The elderly witness's memory of the younger, athletic man helping Blackwood with heavy digging and the whispered arguments about things they found electrified the cold case team. This drifter, an unknown entity for decades, now became the prime suspect, not only in Blackwood's murder, but potentially as an active participant in the demise of Christina and Melissa. The description was scant, a ghost from the past, but it provided a concrete lead, a new face to put to the long, unanswered questions. Investigators plunged into archives of transient workers, labor records, and even local arrest logs from the mid to late 1960s, searching for anyone matching the vague physical description or known to have worked on remote ranches in the Houston area. They expanded their search to other cold cases from that era, looking for similar patterns of violence or disappearances that might be linked to a transient killer. The narrative began to crystallize. Christina and Melissa, after the concert, might have taken a detour, perhaps gotten lost, or even pulled over for a mechanical issue on a secluded road near Blackwood's ranch. They could have encountered Blackwood and his accomplice in the midst of some illicit activity, perhaps illegal excavation of artifacts, or something even more nefarious. The arguments the witness overheard between Blackwood and the drifter about things they found could refer to ancient artifacts, or even something more directly related to the girls themselves. The possibility that the girls had witnessed something they shouldn't have, or that they were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, became chillingly plausible. The blunt force, trauma to their skulls, consistent with a violent panicked attack, could have been delivered by either man or both in a desperate effort to silence them. The meticulously buried car, a grave designed for ultimate concealment, spoke volumes about the killer's intent to obliterate any trace of their crime. The depth of the burial, 13 feet, pointed to significant effort and expertise with heavy machinery, a skill shared by both Blackwood and, by the witness's account, the drifter. The CB radio antenna, snapped in desperation, became a silent testament to the girl's final moments of terror, attempting to reach out for help before being brutally silenced. The antique arrowhead, once a baffling anomaly, now took on a more significant role. It could have been an object of contention between Blackwood and the drifter, a prized find that sparked an argument, or perhaps it was dropped during the struggle with the girls, a silent witness to their last breath. The discovery of Blackwood's body, shot twice and hastily buried, fit perfectly into this evolving narrative. If the drifter was indeed his accomplice, a falling out over the murders, the spoils of their illicit activities, or even a dispute over how to handle the lingering evidence, could have escalated into a fatal confrontation. The drifter, younger and likely more agile, could have easily overpowered and killed Blackwood, burying him in a shallow, less meticulous grave before vanishing himself, leaving Blackwood's more elaborate concealment of the Chrysler as a deceptive misdirection. The contrast between the two burial sites, the precise, deep burial of the car versus the hurried, shallow grave of Blackwood, suggested different intents, different states of mind, and perhaps even different perpetrators for the final act of each concealment. This implied that the drifter, after killing Blackwood, was less concerned with ultimate secrecy for his former partner, perhaps just wanting to dispose of the body quickly before fleeing. The investigation, now fueled by these new insights, refocused on identifying the drifter. Sketch artists worked with the witness to create a composite, however imperfect, from decades-old memories. The sketch, though grainy and generalized, was circulated to law enforcement agencies across the state and beyond, reigniting hope that a cold lead might finally break the case wide open. The names of local drifters, seasonal workers, and known criminals from the era were cross-referenced, a painstaking process that slowly, relentlessly narrowed the field. The families of Christina and Melissa, after decades of agonizing uncertainty, now faced a fresh wave of revelations, each one a painful excavation of their daughter's final moments. The journey from a simple missing persons case to a complex double murder intertwined with a second homicide, involving a reclusive landowner and a shadowy drifter, was a testament to the grim persistence of unsolved mysteries. The desolate Texas ranch, once a place of silent secrets, had finally begun to yield its horrifying truths, one buried layer at a time, bringing the investigation agonizingly close to naming the last, elusive piece of this decades-old puzzle. The true identity of the drifter, the final architect of this multi-layered tragedy, remained the elusive prize, a name that would, finally, bring a semblance of closure to a story of profound loss and unspeakable violence.